This hearing will come to order, and good afternoon and welcome. Mr. Scolese, we're glad you're here. And Mr. Hall is here too. We are, just to let everyone know, at 2:30 or hopefully more of a quarter till, votes will start on the floor, we're told, and there'll be a series of them, so it goes for a while. And so what we're hoping to do is be able to have a good hearing here before, so we don't hold everybody up. And Mr. Hall concurs, and we're glad of that. So before I go any further, I'd just like to take a moment and express my appreciation for your service over these past few months. You were handed a very challenging job when you were asked to serve as our acting administrator for NASA, and by all accounts, you've handled your responsibility with distinction, as you have done your previous jobs there. It's clearly a reflection of your competence and skill, but it's also, I think, an indication of the high caliber of civil service employees at NASA. And so we've seen the competence on display over the past few days as a crew of 7 NASA astronauts has worked to service the Hubble Space Telescope to the extent its ability to conduct productive science. At the same time, 3 crew members are operating overhead in the International Space Station with their own set of complex tasks to carry out. And we've seen multiple examples of the value of NASA science research that has helped us to better understand both climate change here on Earth and events in the far reaches of the universe. And we've seen NASA-funded aeronautics R&D transform the nation's commercial and military aviation capabilities over the past 5 decades. Yet it's become clear in recent years that resources given to NASA haven't kept pace with the task that the nation has asked it to carry out. That's why this committee and ultimately Congress as a whole passed the NASA Authorization Act of 2008, which authorized a significant increase in funding for NASA. And I'm very pleased that the Obama administration has responded to that congressional consensus by supporting augmented funding for NASA in both the Recovery Act and the FY 2010 budgetary request. It's a welcome recognition that NASA is relevant to address the nation's societal needs and is an important contributor to our scientific and technical competitiveness. That's good news. However, more needs to be done if the positive steps taken by this administration are going to be sustained. For example, it is clear that the flat-funded proposal for NASA after FY 2010 would make it very difficult to make progress on a number of important programs, including the Exploration Initiative that was endorsed by Congress in the last 2 NASA Authorization Acts. And while I hope and expect that the Human Spaceflight Review that is going to be conducted under the very able leadership of Norm Augustine will help clarify what is needed to keep that important initiative on track, I think the basic situation is already clear. Either the nation is going to have to give NASA enough funding to meet the dual challenges of carrying out its current and planned missions and of revitalizing the agency's human and physical capital, or the nation is going to have to agree on what it wants NASA to cut. As the overwhelming bipartisan support for the NASA Authorization Act of 2008 demonstrates, Congress believes that NASA is an important contributor to America's future, well-being, and worthy of our increased investment in it. At the same time, I don't view investing in NASA as a blank check. This committee is going to be vigilant in seeking to ensure that NASA is a good steward of taxpayer dollars. Indeed, the first hearing of Chair Gifford's Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee earlier this year was on NASA's cost management practices, and I have no doubt the committee will continue our oversight on these issues in the months ahead. So we're going to go forward with the reauthorization of NASA this year, and we need to have a good understanding of the issues and opportunities facing the agency in the wake of President's budget request. Today's hearing is the first step in that process, and I again want to welcome Acting Administrator Scolese for your participation, and I look forward to your testimony. And now I recognize Mr. Hall for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I will not present my entire statement. I ask unanimous consent that it be put in the record. I just want to thank you. You very well covered the opening statements for both of us. But I want to thank you for holding this hearing. And 2010, as you know and we all realize, is a very pivotal year for our space program. This is a very important opportunity to hear from NASA and seek answers to a lot of questions. I'd like to also welcome our witness, acting NASA Administrator. Chris, thank you. You've been doing a difficult job under challenging circumstances, and thank you for your dedication. I'll skip on over and just say NASA is one area of the federal budget where I think some increases are justified. 3% sounds like a lot to a lot of people, but that's a very small budget for anything as important as NASA is to this country. We may just defend the next war out of space. We've got to be ready for those things, and NASA is so very important to us. The administration has called for an independent review of human spaceflight to be chaired by Norm Augustine, and the president couldn't have picked a better person for that, a more knowledgeable person for it, and had a visit with him this morning, and I'm sure that he visited the chairman before he came to my office. But he is a great American and outstanding person to make that study for you, and let me tell you, he'll call it like it is, and he'll call it like he sees it. So we're very, very lucky to have him doing that. And NASA is still on a path to complete the remaining shuttle missions, including an additional flight to deliver the alpha magnetic spectrometer, hell, I can't say anything, and then retire the shuttle without having developed a new capability to get independently to and from the ISS. That's one of the major problems, and we're hoping that Norm's going to give us some answer to that. And I'm very concerned that the budget's deleted nearly all of the out-year funding for the lunar lander and for the heavy lift Constellation launch vehicle that's necessary to get us out of the low Earth orbit. The exploration program needs stability and growth and can't be, it has to be properly funded, and which I don't think they are. I just close with saying American companies have until recently led the world in the production of leading-edge technology in aviation, communications, surveillance, and navigation services. I worry that underinvesting in these disciplines are going to be, and I don't know how many years to see, but really come home to haunt us. We're making a mistake. I hope you can lead us out of that mistake. Look forward to hearing you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I certainly concur with your comments. Where we are is that the votes have started earlier than we thought. So, Mr. Scolese, I think the thing to do is for you to go forward, make your statement, and then we'll try to make you comfortable here while we go vote and come back as quickly as we can. And so let me now call upon our witness today, Mr. Christopher Scolese, who is the acting administrator as well as the associate administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And you are recognized for 5 minutes or the time you may consume.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the President's FY 2010 budget request for NASA. The President's request of $18.686 billion for NASA represents an increase of $903.6 million above the FY 2009 omnibus appropriation. First, let me note that NASA's FY 2009 budget is $18.784 billion, or about $1.17 billion above the FY 2009 request, which reflects an increase of $168.2 million in the regular appropriation and about $1 billion in the Recovery Act. NASA is appreciative of the support of this committee and Congress for the NASA Authorization Act of 2008, full funding of the FY 2009 request, and for the additional Recovery Act funds, which will enable NASA to meet critical priorities. The President's FY 2010 request includes $4.5 billion for science. In Earth science, NASA is continuing to work aggressively to implement the recommendations of the Decadal Survey. The first 4 decadal missions will be accelerated, and NASA will issue its first venture class announcement of opportunity later this year. Over the next year, we plan to launch the Glory and Aquarius missions and the GOZO mission for NOAA and complete the NPOS preparatory project. Further, we will continue development of the foundational missions, including the Global Precipitation Mission, the Landsat Data Continuity Mission, and initiate work on the thermal infrared sensor. NASA is further assessing options to recover from the disappointing loss of the orbiting Carbon Observatory, and will keep you informed of our findings and plans. In planetary science, we are continuing the exploration of the solar system with the Juno mission to Jupiter and the Mars Science Laboratory and the MAVEN Scout mission. In astrophysics, I'm pleased to report that the final Hubble servicing mission, EVA, was completed yesterday, and this morning the Space Shuttle successfully released a revitalized Hubble Space Telescope. We look forward to the safe return of the crew and to many more years of discovery from Hubble. Development continues on the James Webb Space Telescope, which passes confirmation review in 2008 and has an agency commitment to launch in 2014. NASA's fleet of heliophysics missions, strategically placed throughout the solar system, is providing researchers the first ever solar system-wide view of solar influences on Earth and other planets. The FY 2010 request of $507 million renews NASA's commitment to a strong national program in aeronautics that will continue to contribute to the economic well-being and quality of life of American citizens through strong partnerships with industry, academia, and government. In exploration, the President's FY 2010 budget request is $3.963 billion, an increase of $457.6 million above the FY 2009 omnibus appropriations level, and $225.4 million above last year's plan. This increased budget will support continued progress in NASA's efforts to advance the development of the next generation human spaceflight system to carry American crews and supplies to space and work to return Americans to the moon. Specifically, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and the Lunar Crater Observation Sensing Satellite spacecraft are ready for launch next month. Later this year, 2 major test flights will be conducted: the Ares 1X developmental test flight from Kennedy Space Center and the Orion Pad Abort 1 test at White Sands. At the request of the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, NASA is initiating an independent review of U.S. human spaceflight plans to be conducted by a blue-ribbon panel of outside experts chaired by Norm Augustine. The review will examine ongoing and planned NASA human spaceflight development activities, as well as potential alternatives, and prevent options for advancing safe, innovative, sustainable, and affordable human spaceflight program in the years following retirement of the Space Shuttle. It will also evaluate options for extending the life of the ISS beyond 2016 and present its results by August 2009. During the review, the NASA workforce will continue to work on all current exploration projects, including Ares 1. The President's budget request includes $6.176 billion for space operations, which funds safe flight of the Space Shuttle to complete the 8 remaining scheduled flights to the ISS and then retire the shuttle. We believe these flights can be accomplished by the end of 2010. This month, ISS will host its first 6-person crew, and next month will deliver the 3rd and final component of the Japanese Kibo laboratory. Last December, NASA awarded 2 commercial resupply services contracts to develop vehicles needed to deliver supplies and experiments to the ISS. Finally, the 2010 request supports NASA's education program to continue developing a future aerospace technical and scientific workforce, improving the technological competitiveness of our nation's universities, and attracting and retaining students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics disciplines. This request also funds NASA's cross-agency support programs, which provide critical mission support activities necessary to ensure the efficient and effective operation and administration of the agency and its centers. Chairman Gordon, thank you again for your support and that of this committee. I would be pleased to respond to any questions that you may have.
Well, we're down to a little over 7 minutes, so I think probably on this coming vote. So I think the best thing for us to do is to recess, and I would ask all of our members to try to come back as promptly as they can after this series of votes, and we will then move forward with the questions. All right, well, we will reconvene, and we thank you, Mr. Scolese, for your patience. And At this point, we'll start our round of questionings, and the chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Scolese, as you know, Congress has made significant contribution to the International Space Station at the same time, we really don't have a clear path to resupplying the space station other than hoping that the private sector is going to move forward. Is there a plan B, and is there any type of discussion going on with our international partners in case this does not work out?
Well, as you know, the plan for resupplying the station goes through part of the 8 flights that we have of the shuttle. And then we do have our international partners that do have, on the European side, the ATV, and the Japanese side, the HTV that provide it. But to fill the gap between what they can provide and progress, we are relying on the commercial sector to go off and do that. And at this stage, there is no plan B.
And so how long a gap do you see us having there?
Well, we're not anticipating a gap right now with the 8 shuttle flights. If we complete them, roughly in the 2010 timeframe, we'll have pre-positioned enough of the large spares and other resources that we need that will carry us through as we anticipate the commercial capability coming on board, assuming that the ATV, the HTV, and the Progress vehicles are performed per plan.
And when are they? What is the time frame on those?
The ATV has already demonstrated its capability to rendezvous with the station last year. I believe the next flight is next year. The HTV is scheduled for this fall. That'll be the first flight of the Japanese module, the Japanese capability. And of course, Progress has been going for some time, and the commercial capability is expected in the 2012 timeframe, I believe.
Okay. Mr. Hall, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try to be as brief as I can. As I said in the opening remarks, I'm not in favor of more deficit spending, but I believe we have to prioritize, and I think, in my opinion, closing the gap in our human spaceflight capability is a goal that should have been given a higher priority in the FY 2009 Recovery Act. And as it is, I'm encouraged that the FY 09 stimulus funding combined with the FY 2010 request ought to give the exploration system an increase of about $630 million. But that's over 2 years, and critical to keeping the constellation on schedule, but it doesn't do a lot about those 4 years that we're losing. Mr. Scolese, if I'll give you one you can knock out of the park here. If the 302B budget allocations are not sufficient, or if NASA has not appropriated the money that you're asking for, why don't you just explain to the committee and to those that'll read it, and actually this is made available to all members of Congress, and anybody anywhere can read it. What are the negative effects to exploration goals if sufficient funds are not allocated as we've asked for?
Well, frankly, sir, we won't make IOC.
What will that do to our partners and worldwide people that believe in us and join with us in pursuits?
I think we'll let them down. I mean, frankly, the plan is that we will be able to start carrying crew up to the space station in 2015, so we'd have to rely even further on the Russians to carry crew up and down from the station. That clearly isn't good for our international partners. It's not good for this country, and it would further delay the human lunar return. And it, depending on how severe the reduction was, it may even imperil what we were just talking about now with the commercial cargo resupply. So it could potentially impact the space station's viability for the future as well.
And probably would.
And probably would.
And in your wildest estimation, or maybe outright guess, can you envision sometime in the future, sometime, somewhere, a situation where we might need all the sophistication in space we can to defend a war?
Sir, I think we need it today.
Yes, sir, and I do too.
And I mean, if you look at what space provides us in terms of communications, our understanding of the weather and climate, and preventing natural disasters, and just tracking hurricanes as an example, plus the capabilities that we get by having the ability of humans to go off and do things in space, as we've just seen over the last couple of weeks with Hubble. So I think we're already a space-dependent civilization, and we cut back, we're going to lose significantly.
You've given us the negative effects, and I think, I hope those that think 3% is a gross amount of the budget to allocate to something as important as space or daydreaming. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Ms. Gilfords is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Scolese, for being here and for your service to NASA and to our country. Norm Augustine, of course, who's heading up the Human Spaceflight Review, testified before our committee in 2004, and he said it would be a grave mistake to try to pursue a space program on the cheap. To do so, in my opinion, is an invitation to disaster. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but obviously we're really concerned that the 2010 budget looks positive, but I'm more concerned, as other members are, about the out-year budget that would cut more than $3 billion for the exploration program, adding to cuts made in previous years, and essentially halting the work on the Ares 5 heavy-lift launch vehicle and the Altair lunar lander. Your testimony confirms, and we've heard the President talk about the mission of going back to the moon by 2010, but I don't know how we're going to be able to achieve this given the budget plan. So, Mr. Scolese, how does NASA plan to achieve the 2020 goal under the budget that's being proposed? And also, based on the fiscal year 2010 budget request, do you have sufficient funding to maintain the current schedule for completion of Ares 1 and Orion?
On the last part first, we believe with the current budget, we can complete Ares 1 and Orion and the associated elements by 2015. You may recall in previous testimony by Administrator Griffin that we needed additional resources to try and accelerate and hold the 2015 date. And we needed those resources in 2008, 9, and 10. And we've received them in 9 and 10. So that helps us, considerably with Ares 1 and Orion and all the associated elements. And in fact, you can see a lot of those coming together. Anybody that visits Kennedy Space Center will see that going on today, as well as our other facilities. As far as the other elements, we're in the process of evaluating what that means. We have not stopped work on Ares 5. We're still doing some work on that. And some of that work comes from the development of Ares 1. The solid rocket motor and the J2 engine are both integral to the Ares 5, plus some additional work is going on. But the overall impact, we're in the process of assessing what that will mean in terms of our ability to do 2020 and what we do by 2020. So I don't have a good answer for the impact, but clearly the situation as it stands right now means that we couldn't do the program of record, putting humans on the moon by 2020. We may be able to do something lesser in that time frame, but we haven't completed the work to answer that question fully.
Okay. I know other members are probably going to drill down a little bit harder on the budget, but I'd like to shift gears. The Science and Tech Committee held a hearing earlier this year that looked at the current export controls regime that is current in our commercial space industry and the competitiveness factor for science and technology. I also serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we're currently considering legislation that relates to export controls. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on how big an impact ITAR and export controls are having on NASA's ability to carry out our international space collaborations and joint research projects, and are there some problems that you can specifically talk about and ways that we can improve the situation?
Yes, there are issues with ITAR. It does make our ability to work with our international partners more difficult from a NASA perspective. We have issues in how we can, frankly, go off and communicate technical information, because we have to protect information and technologies that, frankly, are widely available. So it adds some additional complexities to what we do. The bigger impact is probably to our industry, where they have less opportunity to compete for work due to the delays that it takes to get licenses and the ability to sell on the market whatever it is they have. That, of course, hurts our industry, but it also hurts us because it provides us with less. The industry is doing less, therefore our products are costing more as we become the main customer for industry rather than them sharing it. There's statistics on communication satellites where we held 60–70% of the market and we're down to 25% today. That has an impact on the industry, obviously, but it has an impact on us because they were building satellites that we could take advantage of to buy down our cost for our scientific satellites and other activities. So it has impacts all the way across the board. And finally, there's an impact in our ability to work with people because it takes longer for us to get the authority to work with internationals that may have dual citizenship. So right across the spectrum, it's an issue for us.
Thank you, Mr. Scolese. Thank you, Mr.
Gentlelady
Chairman.
yield.
Yes.
The president, I think, stated about 3 weeks ago that all of research and development ought to be 3%. I think that's vastly underrated. I think NASA alone needs 1%. And if you escalate that up and put the other 2 points there out of the 3%, I think he's underguessing maybe by a full percent or maybe 2%. But NASA's terribly underfunded, and if we don't do something, we're going to be at Russia's mercy. I don't want to be there, and they're not going to finish the constellation on time. We need to fly one bird and borrow off of the other three, and get that to go a couple of years, and then have Constellation funded properly to where they could escalate the completion of that. You know, I hate to talk about World War II, but in World War II, we had one aircraft carrier when we knew the Japanese were going to bomb Midway, and they were going to attack Midway. There's another aircraft carrier that came into Pearl Harbor several days after the Battle of the Coral Sea. It took 7 months to repair it, but when they found out they were going to bomb Midway, Nimitz said, do this in 7 days, not 7 months. And they did. And we had 2 carriers at Midway, or we might not have won the battle in the Pacific. We need to tell the folks that are down, that are not sufficiently taking care of NASA, that this is an emergency too. This is very much an emergency because the next war might be fought out of space. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I believe I can speak for the members of the committee that we love your passion in having you on this committee, and it's an honor to serve with you. Thank you.
Mr. Olson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Scolese, I just want to, first of all, say I applaud you for doing an outstanding job under some very trying circumstances. The task of leading NASA is difficult under normal situations, but the position you found yourself in is something that's not to be envied. And aside from the budgetary and the programmatic challenges you've overseen, an extremely successful, and above all else, we've got a safe shuttle mission, which is going on as we speak. Front page here of the Washington Post.
Thank you, sir. Yep, that's
Yep.
great picture of
Great.
Mike Massimino.
There you go. Great, great stuff. And again, I want to thank you and say congratulations on the job
you,
well
sir.
done. In terms of my questions, I want to talk about, could you please give us an update on the transition from the shuttle to the Constellation? For example, I knew that we had to keep both of the launch pads at Kennedy in configuration for the shuttle until this mission was complete. So one of them should be getting transitioned to the Ares 1X, and I just want an update on those type issues, if you don't mind, sir.
Certainly. The transition is going per plan. We're in the process of flying out the shuttle manifest. We have 8 more flights now that Hubble is almost done. The workforce is starting to transition as some of the shuttle people working shuttle are also working on the Constellation or on Ares or Orion. As far as the progress that you can visibly see at all of our centers is probably most visible at the Kennedy Space Center. When you look at, we have 2 pads, 39A and 39B. We launched the shuttle off of 39A to go up to Hubble. Sitting on the adjacent pad, 39B, is the rescue vehicle. We won't release that until we're ready to return to Earth with this mission. But when you look at that pad, you can already see that it's different. We have the Lightning towers up, and once we roll that shuttle back, we'll turn it completely over to the Constellation program. We've turned one of the mobile launch platforms over already to support the Ares 1X test that will happen later this year. We've had to delay it because we kept 39B. When you walk into the vertical assembly building at the Cape, you will see the Ares 1X vehicle being built. It's being stacked. Every time I go down there, I look at it, and I'm absolutely impressed by the progress that the people are making on that. It's scheduled for launch later this year. Go out the back of the VAB, and you'll see the mobile launch platform, the new mobile launch platform, being built for the Ares 1. And as you visit our various facilities at Johnson or Marshall or the contractor facilities in Denver, you can see some great progress going on the Orion vehicle, the ground support equipment, the launch site equipment. So we're making some very good progress on Orion and Ares as we speak.
Thank you very much for that answer. Shifting gears a little bit to the new Human Space Flight Review Panel, just wanted to get a sense for what are the employees at NASA, from your perspective, sort of thinking about that review panel? I mean, are there concerns? Are they pleased that it's proceeding? Just want to sort of get your kind of lay of the land on how that is with the personnel.
Well, I think it's fair to say it's mixed. No one likes to take a test, and this is a test. Some people clearly recognize the value of the review, given some of the questions that have been opened, and they clearly are relieved and recognize the objectivity and openness of Norm Augustine leading the panel. Identifies the seriousness that the administration takes in coming up with a good answer. What I can say is that while people are concerned, I'm sure they are, they're going to go off and demonstrate that they're making the right progress and they're doing the right things, and they'll be fully open with the team and provide them with whatever information that they need. And I think in the end we'll have a good outcome. And I think the team recognizes that too.
Thank you very much for that question. I agree with that. I mean, I think our problem has been not a vision, but just a lack of commitment on our part to put the resources we need to it. But thank you, and I yield back my time.
We'll move from Houston down to Marshall Space Flight Center and Dr. Griffin.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. I think America had this conversation about a half a century ago when we were challenged by the Russians. We're having it again. And the question is, are we committed? Can we do it again? Are we ready to accept the challenge? China's walking in space 6 weeks ago. Russia's up. India's going up. Iran has launched its satellite. And in my opinion, although the Saturn is the 8th wonder of the world, we have another one on the drawing board, and that's our Ares 5. I don't think it's an option for America. I think it's an essential for America to maintain its position. I think it has to happen. I think Norm Augustine's commission should not be reviewing whether or not human space exploration is a possibility, feasibility. We're the wealthiest country in the world. We know that it is. What we want him to say is how can we get there and explain to the public and to the administration that we're underfunded. And so with that, you've done a great job, and we appreciate you very much and all of the team that's working on the Constellation project. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
But where do you stand on that?
I've watched too many space flights.
Okay. Dr. Ehlers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be that you recognize someone whose district doesn't benefit materially from the activities of NASA. Just a couple of questions on the Mars exploration program. You mentioned the MSL and what you're doing there. What else do you have going on the Mars program? Do you have more robotic satellites planned? And is there still any discussion at all of manned venture or human ventures to Mars?
Yes, sir. We have, besides MSL, we recently selected the MAVEN mission, which is a competitively selected mission in our Scout program to go off and look at the atmosphere of Mars and understand its composition. In addition, we've started a partnership with the Europeans to do an aggressive mission on Mars and in orbit around Mars for the 2016 opportunity. And that will start building up more and more towards greater and greater capability at Mars. As you know, we already have a number of satellites around Mars, and we have vehicles on the surface of Mars. We're trying to get Spirit unstuck, and we're working on that, but we have 2 rovers that are still on Mars. And they're doing the reconnaissance that, as well as the exploration to understand more about Mars. They're also doing the reconnaissance for potential human missions. And the program of Constellation that we were just talking about, with the heavy lift launch vehicles and the capabilities that we're developing, has as its ultimate goal to get humans to Mars at some time in the future. So we're still looking towards Mars and looking how to do that with humans. As you know, Mars presents more biological challenges almost than the physical ones. To keep a crew alive for 3 or 4 years in space is quite a challenge. But that is a goal of the program, to take humans to Mars.
I assume you also hope to return them to Earth?
Yes, we do, alive.
Okay. You haven't mentioned that part. That's where all the expense really comes
That's
from.
right.
Maintaining them and coming back. You could probably find lots of volunteers who don't mind whether they come back.
Go one way. No, I don't think we want to do that.
No, I agree. I do also incidentally want to thank you for the work on the Hubble. I was one of the chief agitators against the initial decision not to repair it. And I was very pleased when Mike Griffin made the decision to go for it. And I assume it'll pay off. You know, we don't know how long it's going to be able to continue, but it's been such a wonderful addition to the science and astronomy of the universe that it would be a shame to let it die before we get the next one up.
That's correct.
So I appreciate your good work on that. I was half serious though about the manned or human mission to Mars. I get the impression when the previous administration announced it, that it was an attempt to give NASA personnel a shot in the arm. But I just haven't seen much in the way of specifics about what we hope to do and what we hope to gain from that mission. And I'm also not clear how that relates to the moon exploration and why we believe it's important to go to the moon at this point. So I'd appreciate some clarification on that.
Well, there hasn't been much on the Mars, the human Mars mission, because of the distances involved, and as I said, keeping the crew alive for that amount of time. We've been focusing on getting the new capability developed, but as we develop that capability, we're recognizing the things that may be needed to carry a crew to Mars, as well as other destinations that are out there in the solar system, and as well as other capabilities that are provided by a vehicle like an Ares 5. Why go back to the moon? There's lots of reasons for going back to the moon. One is to practice. We have not landed with humans on another planetary body since Apollo 17 in the early 1970s. And we need to go off and develop those skills again as a very minimum if we're going to go there. And of course, the moon provides an opportunity to practice those capabilities in a relatively safer environment where you're only 3 days away from Earth as opposed to months or years away from Earth, as well as the scientific benefits and the potential commercial benefits of the moon that we'll be looking at.
Well, let me just comment that I think you haven't mentioned anything about new propulsion systems. I think that's basically your biggest problem. Trying to use chemical propellants to get to Mars and back, particularly to get the crew back off the surface. It's a huge problem and a huge expense.
Absolutely.
Are you investigating other systems that might be far better than using chemical propellants?
For in-space propulsion, that's one of the areas that unfortunately we don't have as much investment in as we would like. The activities looking at alternative types of propellants, nuclear propulsion and nuclear electric, have mostly been for smaller missions, but that's an area that clearly we'd like to do it, but we don't have the resources right now.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Ellers. And Ms. Fudge is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Just a couple of questions. One is, I happen to come from the area where NASA Glenn is located, so my questions will be about NASA Glenn. I was very interested to read in your prepared statement that you are looking at and addressing some computational models and experiments in the icing research tunnel at NASA, at Glenn Research Center. And I'm just curious, do you think that if the Glenn icing research tunnel, which is a very, very old structure, which built right after World War II, would be more productive if it were modernized?
We're looking at modernization of various facilities. I'm not 100% sure if that's one of them, so I couldn't say sitting here, but we can get back to you on that. Okay. But we are looking at revitalizing and upgrading facilities where possible and when needed.
Well, additionally, are you making use of other aviation safety issues that, Glenn does have an expertise in propulsion? Are you using that expertise in any other way?
Yeah, if the question is, are we using Glenn's capabilities to develop improved propulsion systems for aviation? Yes. The answer is yes, and in a broad spectrum of areas. So we have the test capabilities there. Also actually in rocket propulsion and electric propulsion, Glenn is the leader there. So they're working on capabilities there for electric propulsion. Also in a small way for robotic systems, although it's not directly propulsion, it is providing power. Glenn is leading the effort to develop new and improved ways of developing RTGs, where we work with the Department of Energy, and they provide the radioactive source, and we more efficiently convert that heat into electricity that can be used for propulsion or used for keeping the systems alive, particularly when they're far away from the sun. And let's see, I have a note here that says that we are in fact using some the Recovery Act funds to repair the refrigeration systems on the icing research tunnel at Glenn.
Very good.
So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Oh, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fudge. The chair recognizes Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome. Good to see you again. And let me say I have several NASA employees and contractors on the Houston end of my district. Just recently took Dr. Anna Fisher through my schools, and a delightful astronaut. I thought that was a great thing to do with the kids, get their excitement. And they always wonder, well, we were on the moon in 1969. Why are we looking at 2020? And of course, you have to explain. You have to build a station on the moon. A lot of the concerns that we have looking at this budget have already been talked about, but I wanted to reiterate them. And that is the cut in the constellation systems of $3 billion, eliminating the development of the Ares 5 heavy lift launch, and the Altair lunar lander. Is all that possible to cut those programs as severely as this budget does and still get to the moon by 2020?
Well, that's what we're evaluating right now. And as I mentioned earlier, the architecture allows for Ares 5 development, if you will, to continue, because the Ares 1 has a solid that's similar to what we're going to have on Ares 5. It has the J2X engine on its upper stage, which is what we want to use on Ares 5. And we do have some funding in there to continue the studies and development of Ares 5. Altair is something that we have to look at further. That's the lander, as you know, to land on the moon. We developed a conceptual study, and we need to go off and refine that. It is impacted by this budget, and that will be part of the product that comes out of the study that we were talking about earlier that Norm Augustine is going to lead. I think once we get clarity on that, that will provide greater clarity as to the human lunar return portion and the viability of 2020 in terms of what we do and whether we can make 2020.
I look forward to hearing about that. I'm also concerned about our aerospace industry and their strength in the private sector, providing procurement for you that's cheaper and more competitive. Lastly, this is a little bit outside the budget questioning, but I just read recently, I think in Newsweek magazine, about cybersecurity with respect to NASA. And about some of the intrusions that have taken place at NASA. As we know, to be competitive, we have to have the upper hand and an edge, intellectual property-wise, of state secrets. How confident are you about the cybersecurity situation at NASA?
Well, we have had intrusions, as has been reported, and of course we don't really talk too much about our security and how we caught those and whether they actually took any information of significance. But we are constantly vigilant about it, and we work with our other government agencies on this because the threat is constantly evolving. And we have to be very careful about that. We have, in fact, strengthened our cybersecurity. We've created a security center out at the Ames Research Center to go off and monitor all of our computer activities. And at the same time, of course, with NASA, we also have to provide resources to the public. That's part of what NASA does. So while having an open system, we also have to have a system that's protected so that we don't lose vital secrets and more importantly, we don't lose our assets in space because we control them all from the ground and we use computers with it. So I think we do have an investment. We do recognize that it's an ever-evolving threat, and we are working with our other government agencies to identify that threat and to adapt and adjust, and it's taking resources to go off and do that.
I know the President's planning to launch a new cybersecurity initiative, which hopefully will strengthen these assets, because I think the ones at NASA are perhaps the most valuable assets that we have. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Mr. Lujan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Scolese, I want to drill down a little bit into the educational component and commitment that NASA has. New Mexico's universities benefit most from the education programs through the science budget specifically, which shows an increase of approximately $500 million between now and 2014. Can you just discuss briefly the plans that NASA has with how they plan to expand those educational opportunities with our university system in that specific regard?
From the science side, our science mission director and our science missions, of course, play directly into it through providing opportunities for graduate students and for improving the texts as professors are involved in it and what have you, and also in providing opportunities for them to build experiments. We have a number of opportunities. We have sounding rockets and balloon experiments where oftentimes students with their professors will go off and propose an experiment, develop it, fly it all within 3 years. So they get the experience of designing and developing an experiment, building the experiment, flying the experiment, analyzing the data, all within the time frame that it takes to get a degree. As we get to the bigger missions, of course, we try and do competitive missions where universities are engaged in those missions. And they're longer term, so they may be, 5 or 10 years and longer if you're going to some place like Jupiter or Saturn, where the transit time is considerably longer. So we have those types of activities. In addition, we have the direct educational activities where we work in partnerships with universities to get grants for students and for professors to conduct work. And we can get you more information on all of those, but that's sort of a summary of it at the very top level.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, Mr. Scolese. The area where I had a concern, and although I saw an increase in the budget in the science portion of this, with the projected decrease in the educational component, of which I believe there's a program called MUST, Motivating Undergraduates in Science and Technology, which is funded by NASA in a joint partnership Currently, between the Hispanic College Fund, the United Negro College Fund, special programs, and the Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers, which is a competitive program to be able to offer opportunities open to all children, but targeted in each of these specific areas. Is there a commitment from NASA that this program specifically will not be reduced? Is there something that we can do to help ensure that this program will remain at the same levels, if not strengthen them, acknowledging that we do need to make sure that we are providing opportunities, especially educational opportunities for students to get into these fields so we can continue to provide NASA the support that they need?
Well, that is very important. I'd have to go off and look to see if it's being reduced. MUST is one of the activities that we do definitely support, and it's one of our critical activities in the education enterprise. I'll have to go off and look and see if there's any reduction to it in the future years, but that's not the intent.
Thank you. And lastly, Mr. Scolese, New Mexico is home to White Sands Missile Range. If you could briefly discuss what the future plans and support that we should expect in New Mexico for White Sands through NASA.
Well, we see a continued need for White Sands. In fact, later this year, we're going to have the first test of our abort system for the Orion Ares stack. It's called Pad Abort 1, and it's scheduled for this fall, so fall or winter time frame, depending on when all the hardware arrives. So we're going to continue to do testing out of White Sands, and it'll be a little bit different because as the shuttle moves off, we'll have some different components there, but we still need White Sands to do some of our testing. So it'll continue to be an active system. And of course, we have the communications for TDRS are located there as well, and that will continue to be there for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Mr. Scolese. Madam Chairwoman, I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lujan. Mr. Rohrbacher.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the fact that you folks at NASA do not now have the leadership to be making major policy decisions, and even to be advocating new policy directions. But I am disappointed in one aspect of what your budget seems to reflect, and that is that with all the, we have here certainly ample spending by NASA to yet again prove global warming. Okay, that's fine. I mean, those of us who believe it's solar activity and chart all these changes in the world's temperature with the sun, okay, forget us, but let's keep spending money to prove that people are changing the climate. But spending all of that money, but yet we can't spend money on something that absolutely we know is a potential threat to this world. I mean, we are totally ignoring, while we're looking over here at global warming, which more and more scientists every day are saying, no, it's solar activity, it's not human activity. But everybody knows there are objects out in space that could well hit this planet and cause tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of lives to be lost. In March, asteroid DD45 came within 38,000 miles of our planet, was not detected till it went by. And had that object hit this Earth, it could well have caused hundreds of thousands of people to lose their lives, maybe millions. What is it, Apophis? Mm-hmm. There's an asteroid that we know could do incredible damage to this planet, maybe not destroy all life on the planet, but kill millions of people. It's going to come around in 2029, but the people that we've talked to have told us that we won't know till it comes through that time whether or not it might come back the second time in 2036 and then be on a course to hit the Earth. I do not understand why we cannot put at least a little money into trying to mitigate this real threat that's out there, but we haven't identified exactly what it is yet. I mean, there is no money, correct me, am I wrong, there isn't even a couple $1 million to keep the Arecibo telescope going in this budget. We got all this money to study global warming, which, as I say, which a lot of us believe solar activity is responsible for, but nothing
not even a couple $1 million for the Arecibo telescope, which is essential to tracking some object far enough away so that we might be able to do something about it?
Well, let me try and address parts of those. I have some
Okay.
good news on the near-Earth asteroids. We were asked a while back to go off and catalog 90% of the 1 kilometer or larger.
Yeah, you're looking at the guy who asked you to do it.
I know that.
Chairman of that committee.
I know that. That's why I
did
thought
a
I'd
good
mention
job
it.
at 90% of them.
And we're going to finish earlier, as a matter of fact. We believe that we'll have accomplished that goal by next year in working with partnerships with other organizations. And as far as Arecibo, we've worked in partnership with the Air Force and with NSF. Arecibo is I believe, in the NSF budget, so we didn't have anything in the NASA budget on that. So we haven't ignored the near-Earth asteroids or near-Earth objects, and we are working it. And as I said, I think we've made some good progress over the last couple of years, and we'll address the 1 kilometer or larger earlier than we thought, and we're starting to look at the smaller ones now.
Well, there's ample evidence that about every year now something comes through and we miss it. And if it would have been just like a 1 degree different trajectory, it could end up creating a tidal wave off of my district in Southern California. And I know, being a surfer, that might be good for 1 wave, but it might not be after that. And then over to space transportation. We're going to be spending more and more money with the Russians, and I think we ought to thank our lucky stars that the Russians are even willing, the way we've been treating them diplomatically for the last 10 years, treating them as if they're the enemy. We're lucky they're even willing to do it. But aren't there some people in the private sector that we might be able to give contracts to for some of the space station missions that the Russians are going to help us with?
Well, we are on the cargo portion. We definitely are. We've signed 2 contracts this past year for cargo supply to the space station, and we're relying on that. In this budget request, or our operating plan request with the stimulus funds, we're looking to stimulate interest in commercial crew to the space station.
Yeah, because if we're going to spend $1 billion, it's $1.2 billion with the Russians for transporting our people up there, it seems to me that that would be a mighty strong incentives for some of our private sector people to develop an alternative that might go up on things like the Atlas V or other rockets that we already have.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrbacher. Mr. Grayson.
Thank you. Mr. Scolese, what options have you given to the White House concerning extending the shuttle program?
I'm sorry.
What options have you given to the White House concerning extending the shuttle program?
We have not been asked for options to extend the shuttle program.
Have you offered any?
No.
Well, I understand that there are pros and cons in favor of and against extending the shuttle program. Can you lay out for us some of the pros?
Well, we keep on flying the shuttle. It would provide us some opportunities, clearly, to keep the station resupplied, and obviously the jobs in the various districts that are impacted by the shuttle. However, the concern, of course, is that a lot of those people who are working on shuttle are also working on Constellation, and that would take them away from working those programs. Plus, without additional resources, we'd be taking funds away from developing the next generation system. So we'd just be moving the gap out as opposed to resolving the gap. The other aspect of the shuttle, of course, is it doesn't relieve us of our dependence on Soyuz or any other system, because we can't do crew rescue with the shuttle. It cannot stay on orbit for longer than a few weeks based on its design. So we would still have to have a Soyuz attached to the station or some other vehicle attached to the station for the duration that the crew is there if they had to escape. So those are the reasons that we haven't, of course, provided that. Even if we were to start up today to do it, though, we still would have to restart some lines, the external tank and the solid rocket motors in particular. would be about 3 years before you could get another external tank if we started today. So there would still be a gap in the program along those lines.
If the White House asked you to figure out a way to extend the program for a certain period of time, what would you recommend to them about how to do that?
We'd have to, ask for more budget, I guess, would be the answer. Or we'd have to delay the Constellation program. Those would be the only real things we could do.
You said you were moving employees from one program to the other, but you in your testimony, you have a projection that there's 6,400 contractor employees in one fiscal year and 1,600 in the next. So that's a 4,800 contractor employee drop. Those people aren't going to be working on Constellation, right?
We don't know. I mean, when it comes to the contractors, it's a little bit more difficult for us to say because the contractors do the work assignments on those, and it depends, of course, on what work those people get. We make our projections based on when we stop doing this work, this is how many people will leave on the contractor side, and then if they win work, those same people may be brought back to do other jobs. So we have a hard time telling you what the actual net impact will be, given our understanding of where contracts are going to be awarded and where they're not.
Have you had any discussions with the White House concerning spacing out the remaining launches?
We have recently changed, if you notice, the wording based on discussions that have occurred to say that we intend to fly out the remaining manifest. And we have not put a date on it. Now, we believe we can fly out that manifest by September of next year. But the requirement now is that we will fly out the remaining 8 missions without a date specific.
What would be some of the benefits of expanding that timetable, spacing out the missions more broadly?
Well, again, it comes down to budget. We do not have the resources to go beyond 2010. Beyond September 2010. So it's going to require additional resources that will have to either be added to the NASA budget or have to be removed from other portions of the budget with, impact to those portions of the budget.
Let me ask you a different kind of question. People often ask, what is the benefit of this program? What is the benefit of NASA in general to our society? And I think that we members of this panel have an answer to that. But I wanted to ask you, looking forward, looking into the future, and I understand as Yogi Berra said, predictions are hard to make, particularly about the future. Looking into the future, what kind of scientific discoveries do you see being possible through NASA's work? I guess one place to start would be the discovery of life on other planets, on Mars, on Europa perhaps. That's one. Tell us what other possible scientific discoveries you see from NASA's work.
Well, that's a difficult one to answer, as you said. Clearly, one of the things that we look for is the search for life. That would have some significant changes to what we do. And as we look out in the universe, already we've seen some incredible changes that we didn't expect. We found water almost everywhere we look. You mentioned Mars. You mentioned Europa. We also found it in Enceladus at Saturn. We've discovered planets outside of our solar system, something that was, science fiction just 20 years ago. Finding a planet that's similar to Earth will be, a possibility as we develop the missions to go off and do that. Kepler has recently been launched and is going to go off and start cataloging, not observing, the sizes of planets in near our solar system, if you will. Looking more down to Earth, our missions are going off and helping us to better understand the Earth. Better predictions of weather, better predictions of climate will help markedly on the Earth as we come up with better agricultural predictions. As we develop, better understanding of where hurricanes will go, we can do more with natural disasters. Already looking at ways to mitigate the impacts of volcanic activity by understanding the flows of volcanoes and identifying escape routes using satellites, fire mitigation to go off and support that. using orbital assets plus UAVs that NASA has gone off and developed.
Excuse me, with respect to Mr. Grayson as well as you, Mr. Scolese, we only have 2 days. There are many, many benefits of NASA, and I think we could catalog those for quite some
Great.
time. And the gentleman's
Thank you.
time is well over. So with if there's no objection, we will then yield to Mr. Elders for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. As I commented earlier, we're still waiting for more of those benefits to come to Michigan, which is in worse shape than any other state. But that's not my question. My question is, NASA is National Aeronautics and Space Agency. All the discussion here has been about space. I really worry about aeronautics at NASA. You have some outstanding people there, and I've been very impressed with them in a number of ways. We desperately need their help, which means you need more money as we go into next gen. I respect the FAA and their research efforts, but I also recognize the unique capabilities you have at NASA. And I'm not asking you to solve this overnight, but I'm very concerned about NASA being able to fulfill what should be required of it in next gen, and frankly, in a lot of other aeronautical areas. As you know, we have a huge battle for market share between our aeronautics manufacturers, our various plane manufacturers, and Europe. And the Chinese are now beginning to manufacture airplanes. So I don't want you to go at great length on this, but I would very much appreciate some comments from you about the future direction you see for the aeronautics and where the Congress should put more money in view of the problems I outlined. These are not immediate problems, but they are pressing problems. And we're going to be very sorry if we don't provide adequate support for the aeronautics part of NASA because it's going to come back and bite us in the next 5 or 10 years. So I'd appreciate your comments on that.
Yes, sir. I think it's probably worth just mentioning the new program that we have in the agency, the Environmentally Responsible Aviation Program, which is going off and working to develop more efficient utilization of the airspace, more efficient aircraft operation, and working on the technologies both to make those systems more efficient, but also working to understand with our colleagues in the FAA and others to make the airspace system more efficient. So it's more than just making an aircraft better or making the air traffic control system better, but to make the whole system improved. That's a new initiative in this budget that's proposed in FY10. It builds upon all of our other activities in fundamental aviation and other areas. So I think that's a new area that goes off and recognizes the needs for the future to have a more fuel efficient air system, to have a safer air system, and those are the types of things that we'll be working on in that activity.
And how much new money are you getting for this new endeavor?
I'd have to look exactly, but I believe it's in the order of, maybe David, you can give me the exact number. We have $60 million in FY10 to start that program off.
Okay, I hope you get considerably more than that because I think the need is really there. And it's not just for NASA and it's not just for science. I think it's a major item for our country as well. With that, I thank the gentleman for you.
Thank you. And Ms. Cosmas from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Scolese, for being here. I, too, appreciate your service, and I would echo the comments of my colleague, Dr. Griffin, about the importance of this. And during my short time here, I've tried to be very vocal in my expressions for my respect and passion for the manned space program. And I wanted to ask some questions that have already been asked. I won't re-ask, but specifically because, as you know, Kennedy Space Center is in my district and I represent the workforce there. I'm most concerned about the gap in terms of the workforce. During the time period that we have suggested that we intend to procure up to 24 seats for astronauts on the Russian Soyuz, Is there an alternative for us during that time period where we would not be, and I think that according to Aviation Week, the price has risen to $51 million per seat for 2012. This means, as was earlier suggested, 1.2 billion creating jobs for Russians as opposed to in the United States. Has there been an alternative discussed between you and the administration with regard to how we might keep that revenue source inside our borders?
Well, with the current plan, there is no alternative to doing it. As I mentioned earlier, we need the Soyuz not just for getting the crews to the space station or back from the space station. We need the Soyuz for crew rescue as well. So we need it to stay on orbit, and we don't have any other vehicle at this stage that can do that. I'm certain this is going to be addressed as part of the review that's going on this summer. But at this stage of the game, the Soyuz is really the only opportunity that we have that can address all three of those things: taking the crew to the space station, returning the crew from the space station, and serving as a rescue vehicle in the event that we need to remove crew from the station for any reason.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate also the commitment to finishing the shuttle manifest and removing the hard deadline for having that occur, because I think that's very important for the safety of the program. But given the fact that we're going to have a gap between the shuttle program and the Constellation or whatever comes next, I assume that, according to our discussion, you're continuing, not slowing down anything on that front. How do we intend to keep our astronauts engaged? Or I understand we're getting ready to select a new class of astronauts, and how do we intend to make that work during the time and keep our core engaged or attract new ones during that time period?
Well, of course, we'll still be flying the space station, and we'll still be going to the space station, so there will still be crew there, and we'll need our astronauts to train for that and fly to that. So we'll continue to need that core. In addition, as we're building and testing the new vehicle, we'll need the astronauts to be intimately involved with the design and test of that vehicle. So there'll still be ample opportunities and ample jobs for the astronauts, both on the space station and in developing the new hardware as we get ready to fly it.
Thank you. The only other question I had at the moment is with regard to the workforce at the Kennedy Space Center. We've heard the numbers projected of what I think will be the loss of a very big number of professional folks during that gap. And what I'm wondering is that Kennedy Space Center has been viewed as an operations center only, and there's much discussion in my district and among others about the opportunities to increase the amount of research and development that would go on at Kennedy Space Center, particularly perhaps with regard to the Constellation and the all that goes along with that. In fact, former Administrator Griffin stated last year that the work on the Altair lunar lander would be conducted at KSC. And I'm wondering whether you have had any further discussion about that in particular.
Well, I think we're continuing to do things at Kennedy Space Center, and of course it has been operations in the past several years. But as you know, we're doing a lot of development there right now as we're developing the launch pads and the control centers for the new vehicles. So there is development going on there. I'm sure you're also aware that they're going to do manufacturing of Orion there, manufacture and test of it. So we do have development work that does go on there, plus some research work as well. So I think there's no change in that and seeing that development go on.
I think we're looking to expand the operations there so that we are not so vulnerable to the gap and other time periods that have taken place historically where we have a shutdown in our community. So I appreciate that consideration during the review that's coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cosmos. And Ms. Brooks is recognized for Ms. Edwards is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Scolese, for your testimony. I just have a couple of questions about, and I put this to Mr. Holdren when we heard from him, I guess, last week, and it has to do with the budget. We have a goal out there of going back to the moon. We have a goal of this next generation of exploration technology and vehicles, but it just seems to me that the budget is not quite reflecting that goal. And so I wonder if you could, apart from the funding that we just put into the Recovery Act, which was substantial $630 million for fiscal year 2009 and 2010, how critical are the activities that are going to be conducted with this increase, and then discuss for me the budget as you see it for the future as it impacts Ares and Orion. And I'm wondering if there might be an unanticipated risk by essentially putting on hold the budget decisions in the out years on our ability to retain capacity, technical, scientific, and research capacity for those and other programs.
The $630 million additional dollars, the FY 2009 and 10 budget, is absolutely critical to maintaining the Ares and Orion programs. The early years, 9, 10, 11, 12, essentially, are really focused on getting the first systems, the Orion and the Ares 1, and the associated ground systems and control systems ready. So those funding is critical to keeping us on what we call initial operational capability, the ability to get into low Earth orbit, to get to the space station, and that capability is also needed in the future for when we do want to leave Earth orbit, to rendezvous and dock with the vehicles that will take us beyond low Earth orbit to the moon or wherever. So the first few years are absolutely critical to keep that in for initial operational capability. We were doing less on Ares 5 and the landing systems in those years. So the out-year budgets in 13 and 14 principally would have an impact on those. So as this review gets done, we'll have time to understand, what we want to accomplish by 2020, and that will help determine what we need out there in those years. In addition, the heavy lift launch vehicle is absolutely critical to getting out of low Earth orbit. That was mentioned earlier, the Ares 5. It has common elements with the Ares 1, which allows for the development that's going on today to be directly applicable to the Ares 5. So the development on the solid rocket motor and the development on the J2X engine are directly applicable to the Ares 5. So work we're doing today also plays into what's going to happen in 2013 and 14.
Do you worry at all about the potential loss of technical capacity, though?
I don't think we have that issue for the immediate future. As I was saying, we're concentrating right now in the next couple of years on the initial operational capability. So, of course, we always worry about it, and you want to make sure that people understand that there's a future out there so that they stay. But I think we have sufficient interesting work and sufficient work altogether that won't be an issue for a few years.
And related to that, are you concerned at all that the review, we have this couple of months that we're waiting for the review to take place, but we're on a track to look at the budget, and we may be in fact putting the cart before the horse in terms of scaling back in some ways on those out-year budgets without actually understanding what the review holds for us?
Well, if, as I said, any change in 9 and 10 or 10 budget will have a significant impact on the program. So, and specifically, we were directed not to change anything until the review, NASA, not to change anything, to continue working with on Ares 1 and Orion and all of their elements until told to do otherwise, and we haven't been told to do otherwise. So we do need that 10 funding if we're going to stay on that track. Otherwise, there will be impacts along the lines of what you're talking about to the workforce as well as to our ability to meet the mission goals.
Thanks. And I just have one additional question, and it's related to the Orbiting Carbon Observatory that was lost in February 2009. Any plans to replace that? I noticed that it's not in the budget.
It's not in the budget. We are off reviewing how to go off and do that, so we didn't have a plan. 3 parts to it. One, we don't plan for losses, so we had a review with the science community and the operational community the value of that mission, and it was determined to be a valuable mission. So we are off evaluating two options for reflying it. We hope to have that done by the end of this summer, and we'll be able to get back to you at that point.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards, for the good questions, and I think Mr. Hall has some cleanup he wants to do.
First, I was a little astounded at your answer that you didn't think there was any big problem when we lose that workforce. Did I misunderstand you?
No, I don't think I said that, sir.
Okay, well, I hope you didn't.
No, I didn't.
Because they're an exclusive group and the highest type of workforce and sophisticated, and they would be quickly picked up by someone else. And if we wait 2 years or 4 years, we're going to have a hard time finding the people to take those places, I think. Don't you agree to that?
Oh, absolutely. We have
Well,
some of the most highly motivated workforce and the most capable workforce there is. What I thought I said, or what I intended to say, was I felt that we had sufficient work and sufficiently interesting work to retain that workforce.
Well, good. That's great. I want to just talk a minute. I've mentioned and talked about funds and about the gap, the 4-year gap, and it's going to take money and time, and we worry a little bit about the deficit, but I think there's some answers to that. We seem to spend billions of dollars every year on foreign assistance, all over the world. And I've sometimes wondered what we're getting out of that, and who knows where, when, or how all this money's spent. I know that we send money, we use part of NASA's budget to purchase services from our international partners on the International Space Station, and I've wondered why some tiny fraction of the billions of dollars that the government spends on foreign assistance couldn't be transferred to NASA. Like there's a lot of countries that vote 80 to 90% of the time in the UN against this country that we're receiving foreign aid. I think we ought to take a look at that, and that would be one place. I think it's our duty to point out where that money can come from if we're wanting to up the budget of NASA, and I think that ought to be not too tough to do. Do you think the Blue Ribbon panel that's going to be chaired by Mr. Augustine would have the freedom to suggest or propose alternative funding options and from elsewhere within the federal budget to help reduce the gap? I know they're not going to want him to bust the budget or go outside that, but I don't believe he's the type guy you can give some parameters to and tell him he's got to stay within those. I think he's going to tell you what he really and truly thinks, and that's the reason that most everybody I know is very proud that we have him leading us. But to help reduce the gap and better meet our international obligations, looks like we could use some of those sources. You don't have any problem with that, do you?
No, sir.
I like you. I like the chairman here, too. I like him so much, I'm going to yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. We have, in effect, opened a second round. So, Ms. Cosmos or Ms. Edwards, do you have a second question? Okay, Mr. Olson, you can close this out then.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I have just a very brief question for you, Mr. Scolese, involving or concerning the industrial base. And as the acting administrator, you've got a pretty broad view of all of NASA's programs and some insights into other governmental programs. What's your assessment of the U.S. space industrial base, and how might NASA and Congress improve the situation to make our aerospace industry stronger and our procurements cheaper?
You're right. That's a very broad question. I think we mentioned earlier that with some of the restrictions that happen with the ITAR, that limits our industry from being able to compete overseas. There's other portions of the activity as well. We aren't launching as many missions, we aren't doing as many things in this country that we have done in the past. So we've had a lot of consolidations within industry. The instrument industry is probably an area that's the easiest to go off and look at recently, where we're seeing some significant impacts into our missions because the instruments are coming very, very late. And part of the reason is what we were talking about before. We consolidated so much that we lost a lot of the really high-value talent. They've gone off to do other things. And excuse me, excuse me. And that's caused us to have to reinvent the wheel every time we go off and start a new activity. And we don't have enough new activities to keep any one organization sufficiently busy that they can carry the workforce through all, effectively from one development to the next. And that seems to be a general throughout the throughout the industry. So it's something we need to address. In addition, we've stepped back from specs and standards that we used to have in the early 90s. And while at times they were constraining and prevented us from doing things, they also allowed us to go off and have a capability that we could draw on when we needed it. So today, we often talk about why our spacecraft cost so much. We have to go off and understand our part suppliers. What kind of a part are we getting? Do we either invest in developing a new part, which isn't going to have very much statistics associated with it, so we have to do a lot of testing, or do we go off and get a commercial part and upscreen it, which requires a lot of testing until we find the part that we can need? So we've done a number of things in terms of stepping back from specs and standards, reducing the number of activities that we have going on so that we are losing some of our workforce. And of course, the pipelines. I think you've heard, and I don't need to repeat the statistics here, how the United States isn't putting out as many scientists and engineers as many other countries are. So, putting in the pipeline to go off and fill those jobs is equally difficult. So those are the things that we have going on, and they do have an impact into where we're going. But what can we do about it is probably a question that you want to ask. And I think what we need and what we're working with our partners in the Department of Defense and in industry and academia to form a partnership so that we can take various elements of it and effectively utilize it to put the resources where we can maintain them over the long term, which is one reason why the NASA infrastructure is important, to do the R&D that needs to be done, and NASA being an R&D agency is an ideal place to do that. There's others as well, NSF and NIST as examples that do R&D, and working with our industrial partners where they can do what they do best, which is manufacturing and manufacturing technologies. So we're trying to work together with our, as I said, with our colleagues in industry and academia and other government agencies to try and bring that together and bring to you solutions that are in our budgets to maintain our infrastructure, to maintain the research and development, and to encourage the educational system to produce more science and technology people.
Well, thank you for that answer, and I have one comment to make, and it's probably not going to be a surprise to you, but I just want to assure you and everybody within the sound of my voice that NASA still has, and our manned spaceflight program still has the ability to inspire America's youth.
Absolutely.
I had the privilege to watch the launch Monday before last with the entire third grade at Settlers Way Elementary School in Sugar Land, Texas, about 50 or 60 of them, and we started watching it about 20 minutes before the launch. And those kids were on me for all 20 minutes. I mean, hands up, hands up, hands up, asking about the solid rocket boosters, what happens when they land, how come they don't hit ships, all the questions. I mean, great questions for third graders. We got down to 25 seconds in the countdown. As kids would do, they all just started counting down at the top of their lungs. But as soon as those main engines started firing and that solid rocket boosters came on and she pulled away from the pad, they went silent and just stared. It was a great, great moment, and that's why what we're doing here is so important. Mr. Chairman, I apologize for running over. I yield.
That's all right, Mr. Olson. Thank you for your presence here today and good questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr.
I just thought of two other places. The $40 billion George Bush hollered back over his shoulder when he's leaving that he wanted for AIDS for I think Africa. Give them $30 billion, and there's $10 billion that we have. And then Obama asked for buckets full more than 40 billion, and just I think the money we ought to rob those that don't deserve it, and we absolutely have to do something about that 4-year gap. You'll be a magician if you can do it, but there's some places it can come from, and I won't ask to be recognized anymore today.
Well, don't you own a bank? Well, there's been a lot of discussion today about the quality and expertise of the NASA workforce, and Mr. Scolese, as I said at the beginning, and you has exemplified that during this hearing, that you are representative of that, and we thank you for your service. We thank you for being here, and the record now will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for answers to any of the follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. The chair of the witness is excused, and the hearing is adjourned. Thank you. All right, there we go.